being first to get the vaccine or being used as a guinea pig. I've heard that a few times. I've also heard a lot of concerns about the vaccine as being rushed. Uh, Many questions about safety and what the side effects are, um, and not being presented in the vaccine trials. I've got some of those questions, and then some other important factors: how protective is the vaccine? How long does the protection last? What is this EUA, emergency use authorization? So I think we'll cover a few of those topics. Uh, Again, as a reminder, if I can have everybody mute, we are still getting some feedback. The session is being recorded for everybody's benefit. So first of all, why should I get the vaccine? And I've heard different answers, and I'll give you what I feel. First of all, is to protect myself and then my family. Um, Protect my residents and keeping our residents safe. It's also helps us stop the spread in the community and set an example to other people in the community. Because if, as healthcare workers, if we don't accept the vaccine, it's going to be hard for us to make a case to non-medical people to show them that this vaccine is effective and safe. And I think it is a responsibility that we have to the larger community. So a few questions that we're going to address today are: how do we know that the vaccine is safe and effective? Why should we trust the vaccine? Is there some new technology that this vaccine was created with? What is EUA? Will I still need to wear a mask? I've seen that many times. Everybody wants to know that. I guess everybody's getting a little tired, including myself, of wearing a mask and shield and gown, all the time. What if I already had COVID-19? Should I still take the vaccine? And where can I look up accurate information about the vaccine? Uh, Not social media is the answer, but let's talk about it a little bit more. Uh, the first two vaccines have been FDA, have been given this EUA, emergency use authorization, which is a quick way that the FDA can approve medications and vaccines for use in the United States. Pfizer was the first one, followed by Moderna. One thing is very clear: they do not contain the COVID-19 virus. So any concerns about this can give me COVID is really should not be a concern. This doesn't have the virus within them. Now, mRNA technology is new, and it is because of this technology that things could be done quickly. It took about a year from the start of this disease, or maybe a little bit more than that. But we have to recognize the fact that this technology has been known for the last 15 or 20 years, and because of the knowledge of this technology and mRNA and the amount of money that the government put in to this, it has taken this long, or this short, I should say. But it's not really a year. It's all the work that was done for the last 15, 20 years behind the scenes to prepare that technology and to have that technology. Now, COVID-19 mRNA vaccines, it has an mRNA core, which gives instructions to our cells to make this harmless piece of protein called the spike protein, which is on the surface of this virus. When that happens and our body gets exposed to those proteins, our bodies recognize that this protein should not be there and it's a foreign particle. And so it starts an immune response, creating antibodies that will be remembered within our system to fight off the virus when it comes into contact with it in the future. Now, can mRNA vaccines give you COVID-19? The answer is no. Can mRNA vaccines change my DNA? And this is a question that came up a lot of times last week. And the answer is still no, because it doesn't really go into your DNA. It does enter your cell, but it doesn't enter the nucleus where the DNA is present. So there have been over 40,000 people in the Pfizer vaccine in the trial, over 25,000 in Moderna. And they were a diverse group of people. So 30% were racially diverse. There were blacks, there were Hispanics, there were older adults, there were younger people. Pfizer had older adults between 56 and 85. I don't think I would call 56 an older adult, but certainly there were, residents up to 75 to 85 years old. In Moderna's case, there 23% were older, more than 65 years. And what they found was it was 95% protective with the Pfizer vaccine and 74.1% protective with the Moderna vaccine. And there was similar efficacy in different races, ethnicity, and even in age. Now, this is typically the life cycle of a vaccine. It goes through several phases. So there is the preclinical stuff that goes on, the technology, and then it enters into a phase one, which is safety. Phase two is effectiveness. Phase three, safety plus effectiveness. And then there is, they use it in small populations, phase four. And then once they get the data of safety, efficacy, and they have to report any possible effects that are there in that study population, and only then the FDA and the CDC, and there are two committees that actually review this before the vaccine gets an emergency use approval or a full approval. The vaccine cannot give you COVID-19. The common side effects are the most common side effect is soreness at the site of the vaccine. So your arm may get a little sore. It's similar to any other vaccines you may have taken. You may get fatigue. You may get some muscle pains. You may get a little bit of fever. And these reactions are typically mild. They last for between 1 and 3 days from the vaccine. The side effects really mean that the body is doing its job. It's, that the vaccine is working and making antibodies to it and making your immune system ready. The side effects are normal and should be expected, really. You also see the side effects a little bit more pronounced after the second dose, not after the first dose so much. You must get the second dose because even though the first and one dose of the vaccine will give you significant protection, we don't know if that will last long enough. So you should really get the second dose to get that full 95% or 94% effectiveness. And it's also highly important that you get the same vaccine again. So you can't, mix and match here. If you get Pfizer, you get Pfizer. If you get Moderna, you get Moderna. For nursing homes and assisted livings, we're all going to get the Pfizer vaccine pretty much.
Why?
Now, are these vaccines safe? Now, most of the side effects after vaccination occurs within 6 weeks. These vaccines were studied for 8 weeks during the study trials. Now we have, data a little bit beyond that too. Monitoring will continue, and there are at least 9 different federal agencies that are going to be monitoring for any side effects. And safety is of prime importance because unlike a drug which is used to treat sick people, vaccine is for normal people, and the safety bar is much higher. The FDA typically advises that a minimum of 3,000 participants are needed in the trial. The current vaccines have included, as you saw, 30,000 to 50,000 participants in each of those vaccine trials. Why should you trust the COVID-19 vaccine? The FDA, as I said, uses the same strict standards that it's been used for decades for vaccine approval. No steps were skipped, and I showed you some of the steps that were involved. There are 2 independent advisory committees. One is arm of FDA, which is called the VRBPAC. And then the second one is from ACIP, the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices that advises the CDC. So these are independent committees that evaluate all the data. Now, in case of COVID-19, we have a lot of independent bodies that have really evaluated the vaccine. So New York Governor Cuomo set up, his own panel of experts. In Massachusetts, we have, and this should be available on the DPH website now. All the academic centers and their infectious disease leadership put out a joint letter saying that they have looked at the data, they reviewed the data, and these vaccines should be used. Now, as I said, the question that keeps coming up is why so quickly? How can they make a vaccine this quickly? And I said it. I said earlier, it's not really this quickly. There was a lot of effort that was done in the last 15, 20 years. But once we had the sequence of one of these proteins from, that was made available to the WHO from China, scientists started working on this right away, and they put nearly unlimited resources, money, knowledge, manpower, technology, pretty much, all in research and development was around this. And then the other part, problem that was not really a problem here was there was a large pool of diverse adult volunteers who wanted to participate in these trials. So they got their, the big numbers of participants really quickly. I think everybody wants to know, will I still be wearing a mask after I get the vaccine? And the answer is yes. And there are some reasons for it, because even though the vaccines are very effective, 95%, there's still 5% who may get the disease. When people will get the disease, probably will be a milder version. Mostly it may go unnoticed, but having the disease and not really having symptoms means you could still spread it to somebody else without knowing. So it's really important that we cut the transmission down even further and wear the mask and gown and the face shield when it's appropriate. It also causes a social dilemma sometimes, because you may have gotten the vaccine and you're all in phase one, and I'll go through explain the phases in a little bit. You may be going in a grocery store and not wearing a mask, and somebody else may feel like, why are you not wearing a mask? Or it may lead to some tension. What if I've already had COVID-19 in the past? Even if you have COVID-19, research has shown that the natural antibodies that are generated may not last long enough, and your body needs this special, almost a reminder of some kind to get the right kind of immune response. Some people may have done their antibodies tested, and if they had antibodies, you still need a vaccine. Now, this is what we came up with the advisory group, how to prioritize, because we knew that there was going to be a limited supply, at least initially, for the vaccines. And we wanted to target people who are the most vulnerable in terms of either what they do, so frontline workers, or as a result of the risk factors that they have. And the most important risk factor that we've seen is age. Older people, especially in congregate living, such as nursing homes and then assisted living, are most affected by the disease, and we see the highest number of mortality with this population. So the phase one, and many states have done this. Some are similar, some are a little bit different. The ACIP has come out with their recommendations. The National Academies of Science and Engineering and Medicine have also come out with their recommendations. In Massachusetts, we felt we should protect clinical workers and non-clinical healthcare workers who are in direct care of COVID, patients, or COVID facing, as we call them. This also includes long-term care facilities and the staff there in the assisted living. This also includes, hospital emergency rooms and everybody who works in the emergency room. So, the person who cleans the emergency room, or the person who supplies food to the emergency room, things like that. We also thought the EMS and police and fire and these services should be protected, so they are in that phase one. Home health care workers are also in phase one. Healthcare workers doing non-COVID facing care, and that doesn't mean somebody in the finance department sitting in a remote office doing work on Zoom would be in that category, but it would be people who are actually working in a hospital or a nursing home or things like that. The phase two, again, would be people who are above the age of 65 or have 2+ comorbidities. We included grocery store workers, all the essential services that the state defined as agricultural workers, teachers. When I say K to 12, it's teachers, not students, and individuals with one significant comorbidity, such as stem cell transplant patients. And then phase 3 would be the general public. So these are the timelines: December to February. I think we'll be done with phase 1. Phase 2 will be February to April, and phase 3 will be April to June. Now, where can you get accurate information? And there are some really good sources out there. CDC is a very valuable resource. There's a section dedicated to COVID-19 vaccines, and there is FAQs there. AMDA has some good FAQs that you can look at. Mass Medical Society has put up something as well. So there are a lot of good resources. Certainly, I've not, and please take note of this, I've not put Facebook and WhatsApp and Twitter and all these things. Don't try not to get certainly not TikTok also. Don't try to get your information through these social media platforms. Now, one thing I think is important to remember: vaccines are the only way to control COVID-19 pandemic. So, I think we'll still be wearing a mask for most of 2021. I personally don't want to do it in 2022, and I'm sure I have many people who will agree with me. So let's try and get back to some kind of normalcy here as quickly as we can. I'm going to stop with that. And before we take questions, I think I'm going to invite Matt to, who had, a vaccination clinic today. Is it CVS, Matt? Right. So, Matt, can you share some of your experience with us and the group?
Yeah, so our Westboro campus or Westboro location had a vaccination clinic today with CVS. And I think it's important for everybody to understand, on that campus we have a freestanding assisted living and a freestanding independent living that are connected by footbridges. So we tried to coordinate additional staff who work between those service levels to be vaccinated today, and as well as we started to throw some of the management team in there. So we're sprinkling them in as we do the clinics in each one of our nursing homes. Because I said that to say this, which is today we vaccinated 192 staff and 103 residents. And so you might say, geez, that's a lot of staff vaccinations for the nursing home, but it included a little extra staff in there. I think that overall it went off without a hitch and went according to plan. So for those of us who've been on these calls and talking about it on your Project Echo calls as well, that I think the expectations were there. Someone had said to me, "Aren't you glad you're first?" And I said, "No, I'd rather not be, because I didn't want to be that kind of the guinea pig on the first day." And there were some hiccups early on. And I kid you not, it literally was the first time the CVS staff used the software. And so there was the first hour or so was very slow because they had a very hard time. They were getting kicked out of the system. They were getting, had to log in and log out with each person they registered. And so there was some software glitches that slowed us down in the beginning. They were very agreeable. They were very gracious. For all of you clinicians on there, I will tell you that they do not pay attention to infection control. So that's something I think that you want to have a set of eyes on people to make sure that they're using hand sanitizer, they're using wipes, and they're doing those things. When I asked the director of our clinic, the guy who's in charge of CVS, if there's anything I should be sharing with you tonight, he did mention that hand sanitizer and being able to clean in between each one of your patients that are being vaccinated was important. The other thing I think that is important is that they, as much as you're all anticipating, they really don't know what it means to be in a nursing home. And so I don't think they fully anticipated how much work it was to do the resident vaccinations versus the staff, right? Because we had the staff lined up. We had a steady flow of staff coming in. We didn't overwhelm them. We're obviously only seeing one at a time, but when they got out on the floor, the first report I heard about an hour and a half after the first team went out is they had vaccinated 4 residents. So they got off to a very slow start with that too. In the end, we started to give them some advice and saying, hey, I think maybe you can do one less vaccinator in the resident side or the staff side of the clinic, and maybe start putting those resources into the rest of the building. So I would tell you to think of it as 2 separate clinics. So you're running one clinic for your staff and you're running an entirely separate clinic for your residents. The amount of resources that you need for your residents is probably a third or 25% of what you need for your staff. I think most of you have probably experienced the same thing that we did, is that we don't have access to the schedule for how our staff are coming in. We know they've been scheduled, but we didn't know when or how frequent and what that flow was going to be like. The good news was that the flow wasn't overwhelming. So I think CVS does a good job with managing the scheduling. We were looking at about, I think on average, about 30 staff vaccinations per hour. Our vaccination clinic was supposed to run from 10 till 4. They didn't leave our building until a little after 6 o'clock. So they stayed to finish the job, which is another great thing. And they were incredibly gracious. They were a much better partner than I thought they were going to be. And they were quite helpful. So a couple of things that we learned is that we've all talked about, you have a greeter, you have someone who does the consents, the register, you have someone who helps with the education. So we had a station in between your consent station in the actual vaccination, where you sat down. It was like a staging area for the vaccination. That's where we did the staff education about what signs and symptoms looks like, what you might expect for the following day, and what our policy was around taking time off. So we had someone who just was dedicated to having that one-on-one conversation with everybody. So when you drove onto the campus, we had 2 people in the parking lot that had parked people in a dedicated space. In obviously with no visitors coming to our buildings, parking was much easier, but we just felt it was a little easier to start staging people in the parking lot rather than in the building. So our maintenance department gave one of the people in the parking lot a radio, and we could radio out and say, just leave them in the car, don't even let them come into the building, because we're starting to get stacked up in the building. And so the Galaxy Note 8 is, get some feedback on that.
I don't know, Chris, if you can mute that person, they may not realize.
Yeah, I don't think they do. They so when you came into the building, and I think this is important, it's an important piece of information, is that we started to get insurance cards and that information from people as they came into the front door of the building, that we were able to get paper copies of all that information right at the front desk. Right? We had a runner that was going back and forth to the copy machine for us, because the CVS will tell you everything they want. They wanted a triplicate, and there's a lot of paper that goes with each one of your staff vaccinations. And then what we did is we lined them up in the lobby against the wall, and then in small groups we brought them upstairs to a holding area, which is a recreation space. And so we kept them in the recreation space, and in our main dining room was where we did all of the clinic. So you walked into the main dining room, and CVS had 3 registration tables set up, and they varied between having all 3 of them filled and 2 of them filled based on what the staffing needs were. So those 3 chairs and tables fed into that was the registration and consent area, and then you moved into the education space. And from those 3 tables, we had about 9 or 10 chairs set up. And that's where we did the staff education. And then from there, you went into one of the vaccination stations. And we had 3 vaccination stations going. And at one point, they added a 4th. And then coming out of that, we had an observation space that had 12 chairs in it. And so what we found was that we had some backup coming from registration and into that education space because the vaccination station was slow. And then we had some backup as once the vaccination station got moving, we had a little bit of backup at the observation. And so in all of those situations, you do have to realize or remember that we're sanitizing chairs, pens, and all that stuff in between each person who moves through. So in the observation area, we had one person who was mostly responsible for just cleaning the chairs after people got up from them, and the other one that took consent forms and did the assessment. So we had our director of clinical services who spent most of the day just doing the observation and manning the consent forms. And then we had a bunch of us rotated through just cleaning chairs and making sure people were okay. Out of the 191 vaccinations we did, we had one woman become nauseous and tried to vomit. And then after the fact, she tells us that happens with every vaccination she gets and every time she gets a shot. And then we had one person who complained of, some pain in the injection site right away, but it was relatively, it was a non-event in the observation space for us. And again, I don't know if it's different for every CVS team or what comes in. They actually brought EpiPens in and had EpiPens available for us if we needed them there. So they were very good about that. On the resident side, what we thought was going to happen were they were going to start doing the residents and staff simultaneously. And it sounds like CVS is, I don't know if it's a policy change or it was just related to the team that we had, is now going to focus most of their effort in the first part of the day on vaccinating all the staff. And then they'll start putting more and more resources towards vaccinating residents at the end of the day. They told us we were one of the largest groups of vaccinations that this particular team had on their list. So we had just over 300 vaccinations today. So that may be different in your particular situations as you're looking at it individually. I would also offer this piece of advice. Don't hesitate to tell them what you need. And so we're falling behind here, or we have this, or we're really nervous about getting the residents done. Can we start that sooner? They were more than happy to oblige us as we started to offer them guidance. And I thought that was good. I mean, it was nice that it was our director of clinical services who was pushing that. So if your nursing director is sensing something that you need in the building, I wouldn't hesitate to have him or her go tell CVS what you need. So all in all, I think it went well. I think we underestimated how much administrative work it took to get people ready to be registered. And if you do all of that work prior to the registration goes smoothly, right? Because our staff were coming in and they had all their paperwork in order and they were ready to go. We had one resident who came in who didn't get vaccinated on her first try because she didn't have her Med B card. So they made her go back and get it. And we had one staff member who wasn't on our insurance and had an insurance that CVS didn't take. And they tried to turn that staff member away. And our director of clinical services said, wait a minute, time out. This whole purpose of this clinic is to vaccinate our staff. And we have a staff person who's standing right here that needs to be vaccinated. So they got on that person called somewhere into CVS and got approval to do it. And so again, I just use that as an example. So you're able to kind of push back on them a little bit and say, no, this is what we need. And this is how you're going to help us. And obviously we did it in a very polite way, but they were more than willing to oblige and help us with that. So I would double check and make sure you're keeping an eye on your front door and how you're bringing your staff into the building and getting all of that paperwork. Double checking. So everybody who showed up at the registration desk, we knew had 3 copies of their consent. They had 2 or 3 copies of their insurance card. And I want to say we had made sure they had ID, but I don't think the ID was an issue at all. But so every time they sat down, we knew we were giving CVS everything they needed to get that person through the system. And that made a huge difference. Because things went incredibly smoothly. If you have the ability to free up your nursing director to let them kind of monitor and see what's going on, that's good. I think you need to have someone with a clinical mind and someone who's willing to be a little bit more vocal in those types of situations, be able to kind of assess the room and see what's going on. There was conflicting reports about how they were going to do the resident vaccinations, whether you had to bring all of the mobile residents up to the clinic where you were vaccinating your staff. We didn't have to do that. And when we did our dementia neighborhood last, and we had essentially what we called a runner. We had a clinician who went ahead, had the list, and went ahead of where they were going and just brought people back to their room. And so we had someone that was preparing a room or two in advance of where they were vaccinating. So we had the mobile residents in their room. We did that for the alert and oriented as well, but that was obviously much easier to do than with our dementia residents. And it worked well. It was as good as we can be expected. We were first on the list. And so we ended up having, I think it was WBUR there.
Thank you.
And the Boston Globe was there. And knowing that was coming, we had an executive director from one of our other buildings that we just assigned to our marketing person to just say, you can answer all the questions, you can do all that stuff. And we kind of kept them on the side. So if you're going to have press, probably, I think a fair majority of us might have local press. It was just a little nicer to have someone on the side too that knows how to answer those questions, but didn't have any responsibilities for the actual clinic that was going on.
I think those are, very important observations and lessons. It sounds like you need almost that conductor to, for that orchestra, and there are a lot of moving parts, and I think pre-planning is key.
Correct.
Doing your homework, getting things ready, and then, having multiple teams take care of different things.
Yep, having everything in one room worked well because you could see how things weren't backing up. The staging area before you got to registration was helpful. All of our buildings did, a handwritten tabletop exercise prior to their clinic, and then most of them went through an actual step-by-step drill. And so we have tape marks on the floor where all the chairs are supposed to be, arrows where you're supposed to walk and move. We did some mobile dividers in that big room that separated the actual vaccination space from the rest of it. So as people were kind of getting half undressed or pulling shirts up and that sort of thing, there was some privacy. And we had Mass College of Pharmacy students, the kids who were doing the vaccinations. They worked hard. They worked right through the day, and they did a nice job. They really did.
Excellent. Good. Thank you so much. And Chris, if you want to, just look at some questions, and then maybe we can open to other people also.
Sure. All right. So we had a question that basically asks, many staff members are concerned to get the vaccine because they have seafood allergies.
Okay, so seafood allergies is not really, of concern here. The only allergies that have been a little bit of concern, and some of the data came from the United Kingdom also, is, people who are allergic to one of the components of this vaccine. And it's usually either the lipid nanoparticles that surround the mRNA. All the ingredients are listed on, that the vaccine contains. And then the other one is polyethylene glycol. So if you have a true anaphylactic reaction to one of those components, then don't take the vaccine. If you have had an anaphylactic reaction, not, what Matt described, somebody who threw up, when they got the shot, if it's a true anaphylactic reaction, then don't take the vaccine if you had that to any other vaccine. And if you've had an anaphylactic reaction to an unknown allergen, then don't take the vaccine. So these are just a few things that you should be concerned about as far as allergies are concerned, and not everything else. Certainly food allergies are not a part of this.
Okay. So a lot of people ask about eggs as well. So that would fall into the same category,
Absolutely.
correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. The other question that we had um, is, do residents and or employees have to wait 90 days from the diagnosis of COVID to get the vaccine?
The short answer is no. Um, so if you had COVID within the last 3 months, you can still get the vaccine. I would recommend, you be at the last person in line rather than the first person, because give others who have not had COVID-19 exposure or the disease recently, let them be first. But you can get the vaccine, if you had COVID-19 last month, or, more than 2 weeks ago, or even a week ago. We don't recommend it for somebody who has active COVID right now and has fevers and symptoms. But other than that, you can get the vaccine.
Okay. So from a time frame perspective, as long as they're not having active symptoms, they could get the vaccine.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Those were the two questions that people typed in. Sorry, one more question. Anybody feel free to type in and we can just go through these questions one by one. I just got another question that asks, are there any concerns about long-term side effects, or has there been any information about that?
The honest answer is we just don't know. So, long-term data is being collected as we speak. We know that over 2 million people have already been vaccinated in the United States. There are 9 different federal agencies that are monitoring this, and long-term is long-term. We don't know the answer yet. We probably know in the next 5, 10, maybe 15 years.
Okay.
But we know that there are long-term effects of COVID-19, and some people may have already, known somebody or have heard or seen on the news of people who continue to have symptoms of COVID-19. Vaccine, we just don't know. It seems to be safe so far. Very few side effects, as Matt also attested to it, today. But long-term, we just don't know.
Okay. Does anybody have any other questions they'd like to bring up?
If you have any questions, feel free to unmute at this point and, ask. We'll be happy to answer. If we know the answer, absolutely.
Hi, this is Lori Hand.
Lori?
I just wanted to know if we're going to continue to be testing in long-term care facilities as vigilantly as we are now, like every 3 days, every 7 days, that kind of thing.
So Lori, DPH, that's a DPH question actually. I'm talking to DPH, they haven't decided yet. I think the drive really is to get as many people vaccinated. And once we reach that point, then there will be new recommendations that come from DPH about, testing and, using, surveillance and things like that. So it's too early to tell.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? And any question is fine. Anybody can ask, not a problem.
I also wanted to add that I have a few staff that have just had children, and some of them they're being told if they're nursing, then they're not to get the vaccine, but others are being told, yes, they should get the vaccine. So I think they're getting different answers from their physicians.
Yeah, I think, as long as they're getting, advice from the physician, I think that's a good thing. We don't know for sure because there were no pregnant women in the trial. There were no, lactating women in the trial. We don't know the answer. There are 2 societies, Maternal Fetal Medicine Society, which has said it's, that they would recommend it. There's the other society in the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, which are the largest, professional organizations for obstetrics and gynecologists, and they have said, that every pregnant or lactating person should be offered the vaccine, and then it's a personal preference, something that they should discuss with their physician.
Thank you.
Sure.
Anybody else have a question?
It could be a question that a CNA or a hairdresser or somebody in food services has asked you and you're not sure. Feel free to ask. You can take the answer back to them if you would like. Again, every question is important as long as we educate people and make it clear that these vaccines are safe and they're very effective also.
Dr. March.
Chrissy, I don't know. I heard your voice, but then we kind of lost you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. I was just wondering, after administering the vaccine to our patients, how long we should be thinking about monitoring them prior to discharge after administering?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I think everybody should have some protocol put in place. The normal recommendation and what CVS is going to do, and I'm not sure Matt could add to it if they did that, they have to, observe the person who just received the vaccine for 15 minutes. But as I said, you can have some symptoms, including low-grade fevers for the next, up to 3 days. So, in many of the nursing homes, I've asked them to monitor people with, just vital signs every shift, check in on them, make sure they're hydrated for the next, 72 hours.
Great, thank you so much.
Matt, did you have luck with them observing, or was it your staff?
It was our staff that did it. We were doing 15-minute observations for the residents as well. And I don't remember allergies to what, but we did, I want to say we had a 30-minute observation for people who might have had allergies or a previous history of reaction,
right? Which
we didn't have much. It was very smooth, and I didn't hear anything about any issues with the residents. The first resident, it's actually she ended up in the newspaper, but the first resident we vaccinated was 103. Oh. So up and about, and couldn't wait to get it. And she was a great interview for the newspaper. It worked out great, but so it was fine for her.
Yep, that's great. Yeah. And no use of EpiPens, I would think, right?
Correct. We didn't have to use them.
Right. Yeah, CVS had announced that they're going to carry EpiPens. They're going to have this, anaphylactic kit available just in case. They've not really, I don't think we've seen much of it, but it's good to have that as a backup.
I was just curious, Matt, of all those people that got tested today in Westboro, was anybody turned away from questions on the consent form or anything in particular?
No, we were expecting closer to 110 or 11 residents to be vaccinated. We had 103. And that was information that came in after 6 o'clock. So I had already left, so I didn't hear what the story there was. So not on the staff side. And our staff lined up. I know Dr. Merchant, you had a quote in the Globe, I want to say it was Saturday, about low participation rate. And we didn't find that. And out of the almost 200 people we had that had said they were coming, all but 6 did today. So people are excited about doing it.
That's great. I've seen a lot of variation, different nursing homes having different, estimates of how many of their staff would want to get vaccinated. And I'm more optimistic than pessimistic, but I think we need to spread the word.
Right.
Any other questions? Chris, are you getting anything on the chat or?
No, nothing more on the chat.
Okay.
I have a question.
Sure.
Oh, go ahead.
Hi, this is Ben Kyler. My question is, I guess more of a comment. What can I do, or what can I say, just to have staff to just be more reassuring about the vaccine? That's really the biggest problem that I'm having. People are just questioning the safety. And I know you've probably already answered this, but that's my biggest problem. Just how do we get that message across to the residents and staff that the vaccine is okay to take it?
Yeah, I think that's the biggest question, right? It's a question of trust. And, I tell people, believe in the science. Don't, listen to politicians or whoever, but, understand the science behind it and listen to the scientists and the medical professionals. The vaccination, as we know, was first started in Massachusetts in the hospitals and the frontline workers there. And I know from Mass General Brigham system, they had an electronic system where you could sign up if you were COVID facing. So many people rushed in to get their spot that the system crashed on the first day, and then they got the system up and running a little bit later, and in the first 10 minutes there were 900 people already signed up, and there was discontent with why did she go first, or why I'm behind. And so people who are understanding it, they really want the vaccine as soon as possible. People who don't have fears, their fears may not really have a scientific basis. It may be just past experience from something else, or misinformation. And I think we need to make everybody comfortable with the science behind it.
Sure. Let me ask you this about the science, and I'm not that knowledgeable, but from what I've read, just from my understanding, when it speaks to the what is the mRNA, by that being new technology. So what should I be concerned about that new technology? And
No, I think the technology, as I said, has been worked upon for the last several years. And they have improved that technology to a point where you can plug in a genetic sequence and then come up with a harmless protein that would generate an immune response. So it was not developed overnight. It was certainly not developed in a year. It took quite some time to do that.
okay.
And then we have independent agencies that have really gone through the data with a fine-tooth comb. And not only that, we've had several experts across the country, infectious disease scientists who have really looked at the data. Now, granted, long term we don't know, but the short term data seems to be really good.
Right.
And then, what about people who get COVID? We know that there's so much of morbidity and mortality.
Sure. And
So,
that's what I tell people. I said, we don't know that much about the vaccine, but we know a lot about COVID at this point.
right.
So that's kind of the message that I'm selling. But I appreciate you answering my question.
Sure. No problem.
We do have another question in the chat from, but it's for Matt. Matt, Dee wants to know if you used the CVS Excel sheet.
We didn't. They did, but we operated on our own. So when we were checking people out, so we had a record of how many people we tested. It was right off one of our own payroll reports. So they kind of did their own thing and managed it, and then we managed it on our side. So as long as we get people coming through, it was fine. And they weren't, again, they put everybody in a schedule and then you signed up, but it didn't really matter. It was just trying to manage the flow. The other thing we did is we had some of our office staff on standby in case we ran into a lull. And so once we ran into a lull, we started to make some phone calls and bring people down and say, now's the time for you to get in, because we didn't want to have non-clinical staff getting the vaccine ahead of others. It just, obviously it doesn't look right, but we also didn't want to waste the time with CVS. And so we had identified some groups of people that we just said, we're going to call you, and then when we can get you down here, we'll get you down here.
Great. Okay, I have a general question. How are you just tracking if you have a resident that received a vaccine today, but they may go home, before your second round? Are you just basically tracking and then inviting them back to get their second dose?
Those residents, from what we're told, and we didn't have that conversation with them directly today, but what we were told leading into this was that if you're a subacute resident, you're getting your first vaccination here and then you're being discharged home, you can be invited to CVS for your second vaccination. That may be different for Walgreens, but we had a discharge home that we scheduled around them getting their first vaccination. And so we kept them, we kept them for a few hours after the vaccination just to make sure they were okay, and had worked that plan with the family. So the family knew that there wasn't going to be a specific time, but we would give them notice after they received the vaccination. So that particular resident or patient will have gone home, and then they will follow up with CVS directly.
Great. Thanks. We don't have any other questions in the chat right now. Does anybody have anything they want to just hop in and say? All right, Dr. Merchant, any parting words?
No, I think, prepare, use this, recording of this. If you need a copy, I'm sure you can get in touch with either Casey or Chris.
Yeah.
We'll see how we can best get it to as many people as possible. To answer Lori's question, yes, we are recording this and it will be available for everybody. And you can certainly circulate it to other people who were not able to join in today. It's just after 8. So I think, it's an hour well spent, I hope, for everybody. And, good luck. Vaccinate as many people as you can.
Right. And just before we start hanging up, Dr. Merchant is doing another call tomorrow evening, same time.